Hi, I'm Allan Ruhl here from allanruhl.com. I am joined by a friend of mine who is a full-time pro-life activist up here in Canada. Um, his name is Cameron Wilson, and I've known Cam for 6 years. He's a good friend. He's he's been in the pro-life movement for probably half his life. He'll explain that to us. And yeah, so Cam, how are things up north in the capital?
Well, it's the heart of socialism up here in Edmonton right now after the last provincial election. But it's good to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Just for the record, in case my listeners don't know, I'm actually an Edmontonian, and if my knowledge is correct, your pop is from Edmonton, right?
Yeah, my dad spent some time up here in Edmonton.
Okay, all right. So yeah, no, Cam and I go back a long way, and I know he's been a pro-life activist for a long time. So Cam, just tell us a bit about your background, where you're from, how you became pro-life, and how you became an activist.
So I've come from a very pro-life family. Um, Both my mom and my dad had encounters. My dad's a doctor. My mom was a nurse, and they both had encounters with abortion during their med school training or their medical training, and that caused them to be very pro-life. And so I was raised pro-life. I was raised in a small town in BC, Golden.
Golden,
Yeah,
just
it's
in the
just
middle of the
on the
mountains.
Highway 1.
Yeah.
Highway 1 between Vancouver and Calgary. It's one of the stops people make and always forget. Um, and when I was in grade 11, my brothers joined the pro-life club at the University of Calgary and started doing a project there called the Genocide Awareness Project, which compared abortion to other historical injustices, talking about how the dehumanization of victims of an injustice is a common way to make the mass perpetration of that injustice possible, whether you're talking about uh, any number of historical injustices. And so that was the point it was making, and I got drawn into that in grade 11 and then grade 12, and then when I went to University of Calgary, I was just hopped right into the pro-life group there. And in this whole process, the university wanted to shut us down. So they did everything they could. They threatened us with expulsion. They charged us with non-academic misconduct, a major offense for non-academic misconduct, in fact. So when we did our research, we found that is the highest level of offense the university can charge. The other listed offenses under that were drug dealing, discharge of a firearm on campus. And so the joke was like they wanted to get rid of us more than they wanted to get rid of a person who started a drug war over Science A. But in this process, the university got slapped down pretty hard by the courts, who said that the university acted without transparency. They're clearly just targeting a group based on their opinion. But that just launched me into the pro-life movement. And I spent a long time working with the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, or worked with them on and off. But I realized that we have an excellent educational wing of the movement in Canada, in the pro-life movement. But one of the things we've always lacked, and going all the way back to when abortion was legalized, was an effective political side of the movement. So I decided that I needed to learn politics, get involved, and try to build that side, because that's where the need was. And
Yeah.
so
Well, yeah, but in terms of education, Cam, like I've always found you to be a good mentor in that, because you're like an encyclopedia for all the arguments. Like, I think I've gone into a ton of abortion arguments in my life. I won about 99% of them, but the one where I had a question, I was stumped. I went to you, and you're like, explain what you do, and I'm like, oh, that's clever. I never thought of that. So you're kind of like, I've always looked to you as the kind of like the the chief of that whole thing. And Cam, I know you've done stuff on a global scale. I know you've done pro-life in South America, pro-life in Europe and other places, but you're most involved with Canada and the States too.
yeah,
Essentially,
yeah.
that's where the core of your work is these days, especially. So in the States, obviously most people here have heard of Planned Parenthood. There was some big news with Planned Parenthood today. Perhaps you could talk a bit about that.
So the Trump administration has removed them from Title X funding, which is it's a type of funding that the U.S. government distributes to, I believe, to charitable organizations that are involved in healthcare. And they stated that unless Planned Parenthood wanted to give up doing abortions, then they're not eligible under the rules for this funding. And Planned Parenthood decided that they wanted to do abortions more than they wanted this money, that, their business model meant that they made more money privately from doing abortions than they would get from the handout from the government. And so they decided not to go for the Title X funding. And that's great news, because Planned Parenthood is the biggest provider of abortions in the United States, and now they're going to be providing them without a lot of federal funding. I think it's in the hundreds of millions that they lost out on. So
I know, that's amazing news. I mean, what do you know? I don't think you've met him personally, but I know you know people who have met him, like I know your friend John, but what do you know about David Allan?
So David Allan is an undercover journalist in the United States who has been exposing what Planned Parenthood has been their scheme to sell body parts to labs, and I think it's primarily to labs of preborn children. And so he's exposed the fact that they'll deliberately structure the way in which they do an abortion in order to preserve certain organs, which have a large value, resale value, to labs and things like that. And so David Allan is pointing out that you can't go about killing people to sell human body parts. That's a clear moral wrong. And so he's been persecuted for exposing that with undercover videos where he gets members of Planned Parenthood to admit they're doing this on camera. And of course, the Planned Parenthood is trying to shut this up as much as possible. So they got him. They were using the courts to make it so that he couldn't release more videos, to sue him, to charge him with different offenses. And he's so far winning in the courts, from what I can tell.
So it seems like from the description you gave that Allan could be described as the James O'Keefe of the pro-life movement.
Very much. So James O'Keefe was, very, very much like that. Lila Rose was the first person in America to try that strategy, and she, Live Action's her organization, which successfully did a lot of exposés on Planned Parenthood as well. The fact that Planned Parenthoods will cover up sex trafficking of minors, they'll cover up all sorts of seedy activity in order to earn a profit from it.
Have you ever met Lila Rose?
I haven't, though Stephanie Gray is a really close friend of Lila Rose.
Oh.
So I was around Stephanie Gray when she was texting Lila Rose.
Oh.
But I have never met her personally, no.
Oh, no, yeah, that would be interesting, because she seems like kind of up your alley in her tactics almost, like you would largely approve of that.
Absolutely. When somebody's trying to hide the truth because they know that people will not tolerate the immoral behavior that they are doing, the best thing that you can do for your society is to expose that, especially when they're doing the immoral behavior with your tax dollars. People have a right to know what those tax dollars are being spent on. If it's, covering up underage prostitution, then there's a problem with that. So.
Okay, and just while we're on the topic of Planned Parenthood, what did you think of a movie Unplanned? I assume you saw it.
It's had a huge impact on the cultural debate in Canada. I mean, it's the screenings in Canada have been largely sold out. It's demonstrating that there's an appetite for this type of movie. There's an appetite for for a worldview which is based in proper bioethics in Canada. And it shows that just how bad the abortion industry really is, and just how far they'll go to cover it up if they want to censor a movie simply because it portrays them in a bad light.
Yeah, no, like I saw that, and like it was so hard to finally find it, and an interesting story here. Like, we'd find times, and they'd be almost sold out. There'd be like 2 seats left, and people would go to them. And then the whole theater would be completely empty. It's like, is someone buying up the tickets, making sure no one sees it, or because I mean, if they do that, though, it's going to be high demand. They're going to keep the movie longer. So I don't know, just something that we noticed, like after church once we're chatting, and a fellow brought that up. So who knows? Now, of course, we're talking about Canada and the States here. Of course, Canada has no restrictions on abortion at all. The only other country is North Korea. And we currently, on top of that, we currently have the most pro-choice prime minister that we've ever had. So, and of course, in the States, they've got Trump, who I would not call pro-life, but he's a bit more favorable. You know, he's nominated some good judges. So, yeah, just contrast Trump and Trudeau here.
So both are probably best understood as populists from different sides of the spectrum. So neither of them value intellectual argument for the sake of intellectual argument in any depth or sense. Trump is a gut right-wing populist. Trudeau's a gut left-wing populist. And so with Trudeau, I don't think Trudeau sees himself as pro-choice, but I don't think he's actually thought the issue through in the slightest. So I don't know. I'm yet to hear Trudeau give any sort of answer about why he believes a preborn child should be legally ripped apart in this country at any point in pregnancy, and that should be paid for by tax dollars. And in fact, any attempt to, and that he would not allow any MP who disagrees with all of that, or with any single part of that, to run as a candidate in the Liberal Party.
Yeah, and I from what I understand, he abandoned his father's view on that, because although his father was pro-choice too, he allowed pro-lifers to run under the brand name of Liberal Party.
Absolutely. In fact, Pierre Elliott Trudeau said in the mid '80s that abortion was not a charter right, and that he would use the notwithstanding clause should the court interpret it to be a charter right.
Really? That's impressive.
So you can say that was Pierre Elliott Trudeau just speaking to the society at that time, but very much his public statements are in complete contrast. In fact, Pierre Elliott Trudeau would absolutely not be allowed to run for Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party.
Yeah, no, that's ironic, because I mean, amongst Liberal voters, Pierre Trudeau is kind of like seen like an icon, where his son is kind of seen as a huge embarrassment. You know, I'm interested in what's going to happen in October. Perhaps we can talk about that later. But Trump, we've talked about the defunding of Planned Parenthood, but Trump has also nominated 2 judges to the Supreme Court that are, I don't know if they're fully pro-life, but they're at least more comfortable with that position, right?
That seems to be my sense for it. We haven't had any real test cases come before them yet, but I think Trump was definitely looking for judges that would do that, that would hold that position. It's interesting that there's only been one president who consistently got every appointment right in the Republican side, and that's actually George Bush Jr. He's the only one whose judges haven't gone offside on the abortion issue.
Yeah, that's true. But, you can't say that about Reagan.
You can't say that about Reagan. I mean, I believe Sandra Day O'Connor was one of Reagan's appointees.
And when, I mean, it's not his fault, really, but when he tried to nominate Robert Bork, who was pro-life, by the way, and
very pro-life,
he got thrown out the first time, because before that, the judges used to always kind of get token approved. Mm-hmm. But then they're like, oh, he's a totalitarian fascist, believes in segregation, all this nonsense. And then so they had to vote against him. Then, unfortunately, in the place of Bork, I believe that's when Kennedy became a judge, which has turned out to be somewhat of a train wreck.
The unfortunate reality is when the Democrats decide to do that, they would essentially decide who the Supreme Court justice is going to be, because they controlled the Senate. So there was nothing that Reagan really could do to get a better justice in.
True. So.
And in terms of Trump, I think actually one of the biggest things that Trump has done is the lower level judge appointees in the United States. So the Supreme Court appointees are the ones that get all the attention, but it's the circuit court judges and the appellate court judges that Trump's been appointing he's been stacking them with strong pro-lifers who will later have a chance of ending up in the presidency under future presidents. in the Supreme Court under future presidents, and that's huge. By stacking those courts with good judges, it actually it makes it much easier to win in the future, to win these cases.
And I know he's got Amy Coney Barrett on deck, waiting for Ruth Ginsburg to hopefully step down. But
well, I mean, she's falling asleep in hearings right now.
Yeah.
Like, she's pretty much knitting while listening to court. Like, it's embarrassing, the fact that that half the country still thinks she is legitimate. Like, she should, like, half the country still thinks that she should be on the bench. Like, she's clearly past her prime. It's an embarrassment to her, all the accomplishments she's had in her legal career, that she's still there and hasn't stepped down for purely ideological reasons.
Yeah, and like, I think her goal is, if she can hold on till about the end of 2019, because I know Obama tried to appoint someone in the last year. It's kind of hard to appoint someone in the last year of your term, and like, I think Obama found that out, and although he tried to go with a more moderate judge than his two previous activist judges, Elena Kanan and Sonia
Sotomayor.
Yeah, her, yeah. And no, it's hard to do that. So I think she's just trying to hold on, maybe 6 more months. She's just trying to hold on.
Republicans will stack it right away. They'll use whatever they have to get that next appointment in there. And they got the majority in the Senate, which is what Obama didn't have. So yeah, Obama couldn't get through because he didn't have a majority in the Senate. The Republicans are going to be able to get it done in a week if they have to.
Yeah. It was so nice how he tried to appoint a judge and they just slammed the door on him. It was pretty nice. I like that.
Well, and that was a big part of Trump's election, because that set up one of the biggest the single most important ballot question for voters going in that last in the 2016 election was Supreme Court justices, and on that it was like 2-1 people swinging to the Republicans versus to the Democrats. It was huge for Republican turnout. Especially when they had a flawed presidential candidate who clearly didn't stand for the Christian values, which is what those types of voters who cared about the Supreme Court were looking for. But they went out, held their nose, and voted for Trump because of the Supreme Court justices.
And just a quick question here. There's so many factors involved in this, so I don't expect a huge in-depth answer here. But if you had to bet your bank, does Trump win a second term? I know there's a lot of factors. But...
So anything can happen. I'm with you. I think yes.
Okay.
And here's just quickly why. Just very quickly. Biden is the only Democratic candidate who head-to-head with Trump would do well in the polls, absent another massive Trump mistake. Biden's the only one who people will view as legitimately being more centrist, more reasonable, more everyday man, not as nasty, not as mean. All the other Democrat candidates are essentially the left-wing version of Trump. And so the average swing voter isn't really it's not going to drive them, and they'll probably end up coming out for Trump because of the the worldview of the two, they fall closer to Trump, and they dislike both personally on an equal level. The problem Biden has, though, is in order to win the Democrat nomination, he's been swinging further and further to the left, and has been picking up all of that baggage that will then be used against him in the general.
Yeah, no, he's got. I don't think people realize he's got the resume. He's been in the party as a senator for 30 years. Like, he's got a huge.
I think he was considered for a running mate for Thomas Jefferson.
Well, I mean, he's he carries a lot of baggage. He reminds me kind of like Jeb Bush almost. Like Jeb Bush, I assume everyone here remembers his skirmishes with Donald Trump. Oh boy, Trump. That was painful to watch because he would smack him down every time. All right, I want to move on to some states. There has been some good news in certain states in America. You've got Alabama, you've got Georgia, and you've got Wisconsin. So yeah, talk a bit about that.
Well, right now the American states have quite a few states that are deciding to push the envelope on Roe now that there's a different Supreme Court makeup. Now that there's, in name anyways, a majority on the Supreme Court who are likely to vote the other way, to vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. And so they're looking to push the envelope to see if you can't get a positive decision. You're seeing that in Georgia with heartbeat bans. I believe, did Alabama also pass one of those? So
I'm not 100% sure. Like, I know they got a very strict law that outlaws abortion like 99% of cases.
Yeah.
Which I think is...
So essentially, heartbeat bill bans abortion after a heartbeat can be detected, and a heartbeat can be detected at 21 days. Mm-hmm. So that's long before, or that's before most people ever know they're pregnant.
Yeah, that's
let
true.
alone pregnant and able to get into an abortion clinic.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And Wisconsin, as far as I understand, they've taken a bit different approach than the other two.
Mm-hmm. So Wisconsin's a really fascinating American state because it's a Democrat, or historically has been a Democrat stronghold. It's been essentially like Alberta is the Canadian Conservatives, what Wisconsin was to the American Democrats. And nonetheless, in that context, the abortion rate since the 1980s has gone from 16,000 a year down to 6,000 a year, less than 6,000. There's been a 10,000 a year abortions drop, and that's because of parental notification, defunding of abortion, and informed consent laws. So, abortion doctors have to tell their patient the real health and psychological consequences of an abortion. They have to show the woman seeking an abortion an ultrasound of their child, and these have, as you can tell, drastically reduced the numbers of abortions in that state, and it's been happened in largely a Democrat state, despite the last 4 years being under Republican, or 4 of the last 6. So in 2018, the Republican governor lost, but before that it was
Scott Walker.
Yeah. And he did a great job, but most of the laws that were involved in this predate Scott Walker. And so it's very interesting how those incremental approaches to abortion can change things so fast.
Okay, and like I don't know how closely you've been following the American the nomination for the Democrat, but a guy who just dropped out was John Hickenlooper, and to be honest, I thought he was the best guy there in terms of values, and he talked about, since he was the governor of Colorado, he talked about how he had brought abortions down in his state. Now, we talked about some of the good states. Let's talk about New York and California now.
I mean, New York and California, it's a race to the bottom. They're trying to climb all over each other to demonstrate who is the most left-wing possible on this issue, to the point where it's not even rational. Like, how can you possibly promote abortion more than they are? It's to the point where they're even talking about infanticide.
Yeah, no.
Infanticide.
Well,
it's nuts.
Well, if you watch the first round of debates for the Democrats, you probably remember Julian Castro, right? You know, saying, not only do I defend a women's right, but a trans right. You know, it's like, what a character he is. Now, the key to advancing the political end of the pro-life movement, and this is especially important in Canada, that I've heard you talk about this in your speeches before, but it's not just voting for a pro-lifer, although for sure we got to do that, is getting involved in the primary stage, the nominations, the more grassroots type stuff, because that's where it's not just one or the other. You may have 3, 4, 5, or 6 people going for it. So just talk a bit about that for a bit.
So as you point out, the nominations are like the American primaries. And the difference being, whereas in the United States you have to only identify as a Republican, Democrat, or Independent in order to vote in the primary, you have to have a political party membership in Canada. And that means federally about $15 for Conservative Party membership. Provincially, that's $10. Yeah. And the major difference. So the big thing is in Canada, you only get about 1% of people voting in the Conservative Party nominations, and even in a really safe Conservative seat, a seat that the Conservatives are not going to lose, they'll get about 1,000 votes, which means that pro-lifers actually get the biggest bang for their buck voting in that, and that's the most effective way to engage politically, because your voice is amplified about 100 times. It's about 100 times more powerful than it is in the general election. So,
no, that's true, and it's a thing that a lot of people don't know about. Like you talked about education, that's communicating the top issues, but I mean, this is how we can get involved, and really, it's not that hard work. It's not that hard. You just have to purchase a membership. That's $10. And you have to take probably 30 minutes, an hour of your time, one day every few years, to go out and cast a vote for the pro-life candidate. Like we did that in my riding. Remember with Jeremy Wong, right? And although he lost, he wound up getting it when the person who won, they found out she was part of the alt-right, and yeah, that's a story in itself. But so it's possible. Although Wong lost, because this riding is a very left-wing riding. In the last election, like the one prior to last, it was the only Liberal seat in the entire province.
Yeah.
So
he put up a really good fight. No one expected to be anywhere near as close as it was.
So, yeah. I kind of wonder what would have happened if Caitlin Ford would have. Although I know she's not pro-life, but she was kind of like a Polish all-star candidate who was personally endorsed by Kenny.
Honestly, I knowing what I know about that campaign in that area, I'm actually convinced that we got the best possible candidate who worked as hard and had the best campaign behind him.
And it's true that he was the only candidate who lived in the riding, because I know Caitlin Ford didn't live in the riding, Becca Pollock didn't live in the riding. So I mean, we tried our best. It's a very, I don't know why my riding is so liberal, but oh well, because I mean, if it's right in the inner city, so. So, something I gotta ask: who, in your opinion, because in the pro-life movement, I'm gonna use an analogy from our Lord here, but the wolf in sheep's clothing. Who are the wolf in sheep's clothing? I know Tony Lowinger is from OKC, and that came out in 2016, where they have the pro-life bill come, and he voted against it. He told them all to vote against it, strike it down. And this would have banned abortion. It'd be the same as Alabama almost, to the best of my knowledge. But so then, who are the false friends of the pro-life movement?
I think in Canada, the biggest false friend is Maxime Bernier.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And
so for those, he's threw a hissy fit after he lost the leadership race and left the Conservative Party of Canada, and he started his own party, the People's Party of Canada, which is
polling at less than
1%,
by the way.
Pardon?
It's polling at less than 1%, by the way.
Yeah.
And so I think it'll fold shortly after the election. So
I expect so as well. But he's really been trying to push that he's more pro-life than Scheer. He's more principled conservative than Scheer, despite the fact his entire voting record, like all the issues he's standing for right now, he is on the other side of all the major issues. Whether it is abortion, whether it is even non-life issues like supply management. He was one of the biggest defenders of supply management when the Conservatives were in government. He voted for the transgender rights bill, which essentially made it illegal to criticize transgenderism in Canada.
Yeah, and we're finding that out.
Coming out and talking about himself as a free speech advocate, but even immigration issues, he's now talking about being a hawk, being anti-immigration, wanting to limit the number of immigrants coming into Canada. And he wasn't talking about that before. In fact, he was on the other side of that issue until he thought he could gain votes from being on this side of the issue.
Yeah, and the thing
Yeah.
is, he's from Quebec. I think he's trying to gain the votes in Quebec. So, who would you say is the false friend in the states?
In the states.
Yeah.
So I would say that 90, that not 90, but a large percentage of their senators are. That the
Okay.
Republican Senate caucus in general is, because they've had a majority of supposedly pro-lifers in that Senate, and yet they weren't able to pass a bill banning abortion past 21 weeks at pain capable, despite it passing the House. They weren't able to defund Planned Parenthood by a bill, despite it passing the House. Like all sorts of things passed the Republican House when it was a Republican House that the Senate, despite having a Republican majority, balked at and shut down.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are almost as many Democrat defectors who are supposedly pro-life in the Senate as there are Republican pro-choice, pro-abortion defectors. So it doesn't like there's somebody saying they're pro-life who's not willing to put their money where their mouth is on these issues and on issues that they win in public opinion. So it's clearly a matter of something else going on, and so I'd say that that's probably where you'd find our biggest set of enemies.
Is there a certain name that stands out?
I don't know enough about the names and the voting patterns to be able to give that in the Senate.
Okay. Yeah.
But probably somebody like Lindsey Graham.
Oh yes, as Rush Limbaugh calls him, Gramnesty. He's got a bunch of great names, Rush Limbaugh. I used to listen to him a lot back in the day. But, yeah, he always referred to the Iowa caucus as the Hawkeye Cockeye. Okay, do you want to talk a bit about euthanasia?
Sure. It's now unfortunately legal in Canada.
Yeah.
It's terrifying when you watch the countries that have legalized it, what's happening there now. So my worry is that the death toll from this is going to steadily climb, and that before long we're going to see 15, 20,000 people a year being euthanized, and of them probably a disturbingly high percentage, and let's be clear, one death of this type is too high, but a disturbingly high percentage of these people are going to be people who are euthanized without their consent or who have been pressured into signing that paper and not truly consenting to it. Because wherever we see it in the world, we see that problem.
Yeah, like I know they're starting to do that in parts of Europe already. And
in the United States and the states that have legalized it, you have that problem everywhere. It's inevitable because human nature is what it is. If you can pressure, if you have no scruples and you're a materialist who just wants, or you literally just want wealth and pleasure,
utilitarians, yeah.
Yeah, if that's all. If you live for yourself, and you're on the inheritance for grandma, and grandma's, sick. These people are. They're going. Somebody is like, we can't deceive ourselves into thinking that no human being in the world won't find devious ways to get grandma to sign the paper, and it's disturbing how common these people how commonly this happens, and how little safeguards there ever are stopping it.
Okay, do you want to talk about Charlie Gard and Alfie Evans?
So I don't know a heck of a lot about those particular cases.
Yeah.
But obviously when children get killed, it's always very, very sad.
I kind of want to branch off to a related topic, which tangentially involved with pro-life. As you know, there's a Canadian named Michael Corrin,
Yeah.
who was once this kind of well-known Catholic writer, and then at the end of 2013, early 2014, he quit the Catholic Church and joined the Anglican Church, although he kept it private. And this is because he collapsed on the issue of homosexuality. Now, the thing is, he was always a pro-lifer, and he continued to be pro-life for about a year after that. That's the thing. He held on to that for a bit longer. And then he adopted the safe, legal, and rare type position. And then he well, now he's just full-fledged pro-choice. So, what do you think happened to Corn?
I don't know. I don't know a heck. Michael Korn was never somebody I particularly liked, even when it was in vogue to like Michael Korn. I never bought any of his books, never, because he always struck me as mean-spirited. And I had the opportunity to be at a pro-life event in Toronto where we were being protested by a group of some of the nastiest protesters I've ever met. People in dancing genitalia costumes were coming up and saying vile things with the hope of getting a rise out of you. You know, the kind of things that they don't think a Christian's ever heard before, and so they say it to see if you set yourself on fire because you're so afraid of the words and so afraid of hearing anything remotely related to sex. You've probably encountered those types of people before.
Oh yeah.
And so this was happening, and Michael Korn was at that event, and and Michael Korn started heckling in the most mean-spirited way possible, saying, you know, like insulting their appearance, insulting all of these types of things, rather than, you know, what our true reaction should be is that of compassion. When you think about it, what kind of pain does it take in a person's life to get them to dance around in a genitalia costume? That's not what normal human beings do. And so when somebody starts doing that, it's a sign that there's something really, really going wrong here. And the humane way to deal with that isn't to insult their appearance to salt the wounds. It's to try to build a bridge and build a dialogue with this person so that they can find ultimately healing, and in the meantime, so that you can demonstrate to the world that you have a rational worldview and that they don't, and try to save preborn human lives, which is really what we're all about. But his approach wasn't like that. His approach was to be mean-spirited, was to really be off-putting. And I just remember being kind of like, well, with friends like this, who needs enemies? He's driving as many people away, more people away than he's driving towards us. And so when he flipped sides, I have a hard time believing that he ever really got the message that the pro-life movement was about protecting human beings, was about human dignity, and was about creating the dialogue with the other side and being compassionate and humane to the people involved in the abortion procedure, not just running them down as evil, as promiscuous, as all sorts of nasty name-calling kinds of things that are not helpful things to say to somebody on the other side of a debate, because, surprise, surprise, you say those things to somebody and they're not really going to listen to anything else you have to say.
Yeah, no, he was, like for example, I know Jonathan Van Maren, who's written a couple pro-life books. I've got them around here. He wrote some articles on the Bridgehead about how Michael Korn behaved at times, and it was just really nasty sounding. Like he'd lob personal attacks against people who were pro-choice. Now he's doing the same thing, but against the pro-lifers now. But yeah, no, that was a big shock. Of course, I didn't know that. I just knew the guy on Sun News with the English accent. But I kind of always questioned something about Korn. I knew he was always kind of weak. If you take a look at his books, like you say, you didn't read his books. If you read his books, if you see his interviews, he was not as traditional as a lot of people thought he was. Although he was far more sane than he is now. Like now, he's, and like I'm just going to say this: when he lost his faith, I'm not going to say he converted. I'm going to say he lost his faith. He became a genuinely worse person. Like it pains me to say this, but like I think he's truly a worse person now by far. Because
I don't know. Just knowing what I knew about him at that time and knowing how he behaved in like his in front of the camera persona versus his just interacting with people persona.
Okay. Well, now he's more than willing to be open in front of the camera,
He's just vicious. He's acting as vicious as he's always been. He's just redirected who's the recipient of his viciousness.
Yeah, and he's more open. He's not selective of when he employs those nasty tactics. Because, yeah, no, it's sad that he was like that to begin with, but like now he's just following it to its logical conclusion, which sadly isn't his good conclusion. Like in 2011, if you go on YouTube, I'm pretty sure it's still there. It was still there a few months back. I don't know why it would be gone, but he had a talk on YouTube called "Abortion: Canada's National Shame," which in 2011, and it's a story I like telling. Michael Korn says on Twitter that he only blocks people if you personally insult him or his family. Okay, fair enough. And then I kept critiquing his position. He didn't block me. He ignored me, but he didn't block me. And then he finally blocked me when I started posting his old pre-apostasy videos refuting his position. Like he said something about the pro-life movement being horrific, and I'm like, oh, Michael, look at this, you know. And then I pasted that abortion video, and then, oh, Korn blocks me.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm pretty much out of questions. I'll just ask this last one, which is probably the most important. What is the average Canadian, the average pro-life Canadian or American to do that, to help out the battle? Like someone who doesn't have time to volunteer, someone who doesn't have a lot of time to do something, like they're busy, you know, they got kids or they got a job or they don't have a lot of time to dedicate to this, probably only a bit. What can they do?
Can I say two things?
Yes, you can.
The first one is make sure you vote in every election you're eligible to vote in, and that includes in the United States primaries and in Canada nominations. So that's the first most important thing, is every time you can have a say in the public policy process about this issue or in support of candidates who support this issue, support us on this issue, make sure you do. Because if you don't, the other side's the only one speaking. And so you can't be surprised if they want to take away your children from you, despite how busy you are and despite how many of us there are, when you're never showing up to vote. Right, so first, that's the first thing: show up at all the elections you are eligible to vote at.
Yeah, that's true. I just a small anecdote here. I turned 18 once. When I turned 18, that was 3 days before a federal election. I was so proud that I got to vote. I was 18 years and 3 days old, and I was able to vote. I was so proud of myself, you know. All right, sorry, continue.
And then the second thing is learn the argument. Learn why you are pro-life. Know as best you can the exact logical route you take from your worldview to your conclusion, right? Abortion is wrong because abortion is the direct and intentional killing of a preborn human being. Killing human beings is a human rights violation. Human rights violations are wrong, therefore abortion is wrong.
Yeah, so quickly maybe just go over the three arguments the three questions that Stephanie Gray goes over.
So I believe her three questions are: do you believe in human rights? If something is growing, isn't it alive? And if something has human parents, doesn't that make it a human being? Yeah,
because they're going to say it's not a human. It's like, okay, it's got a human father and a human mother. What does that make it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm yet to see as ugly as some babies can be. I'm yet to see one that's not human. Right? You never ask a woman if she's pregnant with a bear or an orangutan or an octopus. It's a human being, and you know that.
Now, they may say it's a fetus, but we just have to remind them that a fetus is only a stage, like a baby, a toddler, an infant, a teen.
As Jonathan Van Maren once said, fetus is just Latin for little one, and because you know what species the little one is, congratulations, you just called it a human being in a different language.
Yeah, no, and so what would you say if someone had $30 or $40 to spend on some pro-life books? What books would you recommend they buy off Amazon?
Jonathan Van Maren's The Culture War is the first and biggest one. I'd say that you just an absolute must.
I've got that around here somewhere, but I don't want to leave the chair. So
absolute must watch that one. Read that one. It is especially if you're Canadian, it is the single most important pro-life book available right now. So
it's very well written too. He's a great writer. It's not just he gives good arguments. He's a great writer. Amazing prose. I love it.
The second one I'll do is Jonathan Van Maren as well. Seeing is Believing. Mm-hmm. It's an argument in defense of. It kind of explains why graphic images of preborn children being aborted are so important to the abortion debate. And then the third one is Stephanie Gray's new book. I forget what it's titled.
Love Unleashes Life.
Love Unleashes Life. I'd say that those are the three most important.
Yeah, and I just want to throw in. I'm sure you just forgot, but Scott Klusendorf's book.
Tactics, right? No,
that's Coco. That's Coco.
Yeah.
His book's The Case for Life. It's a great book. I tried to find it. I've got it somewhere around here, but
it's a good one.
The
Tactics by Greg Kuckel is another big one to read. But yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So that I got one very, very, very important question left. The most important question. How are the Raptors going to repeat without Kawhi Leonard?
They're not. Is the answer to that question.
Yeah, I know it's a pretty basic question. So Cam, I'm all out of questions. So if there's anything you just want to add, take 1 or 2 minutes and maybe give some good resources for people, some good websites. We talked about books, but that costs cash. If they can only go on the websites, maybe. Take it away.
And Life Site News is an important thing to go to. It'll keep you up to date on a lot of the important issues that we talked about. The Bridgehead is another important one.
That's John Van Maren's, right?
That's John Van Maren's blog. Yep. And in general, just follow the stuff that's happening from places like Live Action. Live Action has a lot of important information that they get out. They have an excellent social media presence, so they're great people to follow on social media to keep up to date on what's going on. Yeah, those are probably the big ones for Canada and the United States.
Okay, yeah. So Cam, thank you so much. Hopefully you'll come down to Calgary sometime soon. It's always nice seeing you.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you've been a great guest, and you're a great friend too, and yeah, thanks for coming on. So and thanks everyone for watching, and God bless.